Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the four women who are mentioned in Matthew's Gospel in the genealogy of Jesus. And we begin today by talking about Tamar. Last couple of days, we've done some introduction. We talked about genealogies, and then we talked about the four women together and how their stories connect. And we're going to start talking about them individually today by talking about Tamar. Tamar is mentioned in Matthew chapter 1, verse 3. And to Judah were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Um, the story is not so simple, and of course, every Jew would know that, and anybody who holds a Bible that read through the book of Genesis knows that the story is not so simple because Tamar is not his daughter. His wife. She is his daughter-in-law. And this is a story about levirate marriage, as also is the story of Ruth. So two of these four women, their stories involve the notion of levirate marriage. God establishes levirate marriage in the law of Moses, but of course, that's many centuries off. It hasn't been established yet. So we know from Genesis 38 when we read this story that the practice of levirate marriage was common among the Jews at this early time. So Judah um, um, has moved away from his brothers. Genesis chapter 38. He's not really presented as a very good figure early on. He's an interesting study. Maybe we'll do Life of Judah in a little bit because he ends up being one of the great heroes of the Old Testament. But what we know about him in chapter 37 is that it was his idea to sell his brother as a slave. And what we know about him from chapter 38 is that he unwittingly impregnated his daughter in law because he thought she was a prostitute. Not things you want to put on your resume. Um, so, what has happened is he's married his sons off, um, and he took a daughter of a Canaanite whose name was Shua and gave her to his son. Um, or no, he did. And he married a Canaanite woman and had a son named And anyway, Judah took a wife for his firstborn, in verse 6 of chapter 38, and her name was Tamar. Anyway, he dies before they can have children. His brother Onan goes in and does his duty so that they can raise up children under his brother's name. But he avoids impregnating his sister-in-law and he dies. And so there's a third son. And Judah promises the third son to her. He says, remain a widow in your father's house until the third son, Shelah, grows up. But he thought to himself, I'm afraid that he too may die like his brothers. So he has no intention of ever giving her one of his sons. But she wants children, and she can't remarry. She cannot remarry. She is obligated to this family. They paid the bride price. They're not maintaining her until Sheila can. But when that happens, she'll move back in with them, and she's in this limbo, and nothing ever happens because Judah never intends to give her another son because he's afraid that son will die too, like she's cursed or something. She's jinxed. So, this is what happens. Genesis 38, verse 12. After considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. So Judah's now a widow, were. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And it was told to Tamar, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed her widow's garments. This is years later. Removed her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, and sat at the gateway of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah, where she saw that Shelah had grown up, and she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, here now, let me come in to you. For he did not know she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, what will you give me? that you may come to me. He said, I will send you a kid from the flock. She said, moreover, will you give me a pledge until you send it? And he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she said, your seal and your cord, and your staff which is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went in to her, and she conceived by him. That's like her asking, give me your driver's license, your social security card, and your credit card. And he does. So I guess he's feeling lonely. Anyway, he gives those things to her, and they sleep together, and she conceives. She arose and departed, removed her veil, and put her widow's garments back on. When Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adullamite to receive the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, saying, where is the temple prostitute who was by the road at Enaim? And they said, there's been no temple prostitute here. So he returned to Judah and said, I did not find her, and furthermore, the men of the place said, there is no temple prostitute there. Let her keep them, lest we become a laughing stock. After all, I sent this kid, but you did not find her. This is bad. I mean, this is bad. He's lost his cell phone, his credit card, his social security card, and his driver's license of this woman, and he just goes back home because otherwise he's going to be embarrassed. About 3 months later, Judah was informed, hey, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, has played the harlot. Yeah, not metaphorically, literally. And behold, she is with child by harlotry. Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. It was while she was being brought out that she sent to her father-in-law, saying, I am with child by the man whom these things belong. And he said, let me examine and see. And she said, please examine it and see, excuse me, whose signet ring and cords and staff these are. And Judah recognized them. And he said, and this is the first good thing we see Judah ever doing. And he said, she is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not have relations with her ever again. And it came about at the time she was giving birth, that behold, there were twins in her womb. Anyway, and that's a different story, where one seems to be the firstborn and then the other comes first. We won't read that part. But this is an amazing account. I mean, it's just there's so much intrigue to it, and yet it's so real. I mean, people act that way. I mean, this is not a story with dragons and wizards in it. I mean, real people with real issues, and he's left her in limbo. He's left her with no identity whatsoever. So she takes matters into her own hands, and 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 checkmates him completely. And that's how her children are born. And that leads to the birth of David and the birth of Jesus. We'll talk about why she's here and why this story is important next time. Thank you so much for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.